our project is called Yggdrasil. And just like the Yggdrasil tree, next slide. Just like the Yggdrasil tree, our project aims at kind of becoming a tool for organizing and bringing together different worlds. So more specifically, different transport infrastructures. And at the same time, it is a critique and reaction to the obsolescence of the airport typology as we currently know it.
Our ambition is to work with pollution as an unavoidable byproduct of air travel and integrate it with our architecture as such. Having looked at examples, we acknowledge the Earth as whole and advocate for coexisting with the toxic rather than sweeping it under floor. We are preoccupating not only with the system we could implement to facilitate the coexistence, but also with the new aesthetic that would emerge from the attitude towards environmental challenges.
You should know that emissions have been growing steadily during the last decades. And looking at the relationship between the London city and Heathrow in particular, although Heathrow is really far away from being such an intense urban zone like London, it's got comparable value in terms of carbon dioxide footprint and nitrogen dioxide concentration, which is why we should to direct our attention towards this airport.
We further looked into CO2 capturing and sequestration methods as opposed to other systems as part of our consistent strategy. These are systems preoccupied with making use of CO2 or processing it into a stable form rather than trying to lower the CO2 production. We look at man-made technologies such as carbon-fueled electricity generators and bioalgae reactors, as well as natural cycles of carbon in nature, one of which being rock weathering that results in different carbonates that could be used in agriculture or as building materials. From this, we try to devising a mix of programs that could result in a complete self-contained carbon cycle within the project.
Heathrow Airport itself is, of course, really well linked into the already existing regional transport infrastructure. However, in the south of the Stena reservoirs, one can distinguish another important transport hub mixing like railways, busways, and motorways. Building on this information and on a fact what approximately would be like the best idea of our carbon harvesting and recycling strategies, we started orbiting around this idea, like to exploring this site as a potential space for our proposal.
After looking at the evolution of Heathrow Airport, we immediately came across the sprawling behavior of this airport. This is apparently something typical of airports and a major issue in airport development. We tend to swallow everything that is surrounding them. So one of the main questions for us emerged: what is the better alternative for a desperate expansion?
So then we kind of started looking into verticality as an answer not only to the sprawling behavior of the airport, but also as a possible materialization of current efforts in airplane technologies. Because there is great interest nowadays in vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, it's VTOLs, due to them having the safer way of landing and taking off. These have been used since long in the military industry, and there are already promising existing prototypes for civilian air travel, which quickly became one of our project's main design drivers.
Since the beginning of aviation development, airports while being associated with a city of the future. The aerotropolis, like any other traditional city, consists of a central core with rings of development permitting hours. Unlike a traditional city, however, the city is caught in an airport and all neighboring development support and supported in turn by the airport industry. This sort of self-sufficient air travel relay system became an important design driver for our project. The airport terminal had to be permeable and perceived as a water current. To begin out the circulation, we made a scheme that has some feature of a conventional airport, but also implements new features such as Uber cranes and vertical aircraft.
We started our design investigation from the mechanistic part of the project, and we developed a system for a vertical gate that could not only accommodate takeoff and landing, but it also responsible for managing the aircrafts and establishing a link to their dedicated standby spaces. And we envision that the vertical gate prototype would act almost like a funnel for carbon dioxide cycle that we want to establish within the project. And the SO2 is synthesized into products that achieve productivity in buildings such as energy, fuel, or even construction materials.
We first looked into combining the carbon dioxide synthesizing apparatus with the other functions associated with future air travel. There are certain aspects that we consider to be completely automated, such as luggage management, and the first vertical prototype dealt with establishing meaningful and efficient relationship between automated spaces and the human-oriented spaces.
You're muted, Patricia, you're muted.
Sorry, I don't know how this happened. So we became interested in aggregating the structure in order to achieve a scaled version of our self-enclosed system that would better reflect the scales of the air travel industry. So looking into the potential site, we investigated its relationship to the Heathrow Airport and to the public transport infrastructure. And as an added layer, we afterwards also started considering climatic factors such as wind behavior, especially. Based on all of these investigations, as well as air travel and CO2 research, we roughly developed a diagrammatic study of programs that the project would encompass. And the system is mainly composed of air travel mechanisms, which are interlaced with the social-oriented program in the form of urban agriculture.
And we started developing the aggregation with consideration to the wind condition in the area and the main parameters that inform the simulation and the placement of the vertical elements, maximizing airflow towards the carbon capture mechanism of the building and obtaining wind shadows zones with landing and takeoff can continue in hundreds, even in case of higher wind speeds. The inner topology of the towers themselves is also based on airflow studies, and it's designed with concern of carbon sequestration and synthesizing processes and airflow, designing with distribution, and that's all get towards achieving the concentration carbon dioxide cycle with the building, within the building.
So in terms of functional organization, the design process is informed by our other two design drivers, which are obtaining a switching mechanism between long distance and local air travel and enforcing the airtropolis character of the future airport. The upper part of the towers is mostly designated for aircraft usage, while the lower floors accommodate the passenger-related functions. And the core of the tower works as sort of a carbon processing farm, then distributes this byproducts within the rest of the project. And with regards to the development of the spaces and the programs, we are basically differentiating between a couple of typologies that make our project. So we have the towers, which have a dominant machinistic character, the airport platforms, which are highly flexible and also account for the management of the standby aircrafts, and the connections which link the passengers both to the transport infrastructure of London City, but also establish a communication amongst the different towers. So moving on, as we mentioned, one of the other drivers of the project is establishing this enclosed CO2 cycle within the building Therefore, each tower cluster kind of fulfills a different CO2 synthesizing function, where the gas is turned either into energy, fuel for the planes, or sediments that can then be used as building materials. Also, in the central space, the CO2 can be used directly in our agricultural program.
The ensemble also had the ground layer that achieved the connection with other transport infrastructure, and also the different tower accommodate differentiate functions such as aero, departure, or cargo. The human-oriented part of the project emerging as focal point with this frame. In order to develop the circulation, we start from the lower space which in the building, which are mainly oriented toward public access.
Some geometry studies followed. As the main project premise is to capture circular wind flow, geometry passenger circulation system was also based on aerodynamics. People are interpreted as chaotic particles that are directed and organized by series of spiraling treadmills powered by energy collected through circular processes.
As mentioned, we started to figure out the interspace and passenger flows from the lower levels of the building. And we used the plan to investigate the relationship between the tower placement and the central passenger space. The passenger flow system emerges from the relationship, and it's especially geared towards achieving seamless switching between international and local air travel. So the circulation and spatial distribution of the central space is also greatly influenced by the user experience, and we're trying to achieve a meaningful space that would have the capability to exist also outside the RAM and air travel industry.
So in this section, there is a better understanding of how the passenger-oriented programs are interlaced. They follow a home plan strategy with some of the spaces that accommodate the farming processes spanning more floors and achieving islands within the building flow. And with regards to the automation of the airport processes, they are mainly organized around the conveyor belt strategy and are layered upon each other, some of them being exposed to the users. Therefore, while the system is automated, there is still a realization of the dynamic processes that inform an airport experience.
For the overall atmosphere of the interior space, it means to reflect the complexity of ongoing airport processes. Users are semi-exposed to the mechanistic character of the development. However, this does not directly interfere with the passenger experience. The project weaves the machine and the passenger very closely together while still achieving a physical separation between the two.
At ground level, there is a dense cross-laminar flow between the different means of transportation and the different user categories. This slower dissipates in the higher level since the building is distributing and guiding the different user categories. Within the towers, the gates are disposed in a vertically shifted fashion in order for the passengers' flow to be optimized and the spatial users to be maximum.
Although we try to distinguish and separate between the different functions, agriculture, carbon dioxide sequestration, air travel, we try to achieve visual connections that bring the space together in terms of human experience.
The overall ambition for the central space was to achieve an atmosphere that facilitates the metamorphosing of the airport's typology into a new programmatic logic that is less of a human procedure machine and more of pleasure functioning part of the urban scheme.
So finally, the project wishes to become a gate figure for the city, this sort of portal or threshold element that is informed by far more than the functional aspects of air travel. Achieving an enclosed energy cycle and offering the possibility for human-oriented spaces that are meaningful in the larger urban scheme are important factors that kind of gear the project towards its current status. Yeah. So that was it from our side.
Okay, fantastic, beautiful, beautiful project. All right, so I'll just open the floor to discussion because I realize I'm the one that's talking too much. Are you guys all still there, or are you just so shocked you can't say anything?
Here. I think, yeah, I think it's, you know, again, immediate and visceral reaction of it being gorgeous, and sort of seeing the evolution of the work in the studio is quite fantastic, and seeing sort of the richness. And I think it's quite now, you know, this is the third airport project we're seeing, and some themes are starting to emerge. But this one, I'm really wondering, for me, it's sort of on the boundary line between kind of apocalyptic and utopian. Like, I'm having a hard time really understanding which way you wanted to take it or what your intention is. And the same thing with, it seems sort of like this image right now that I'm looking at, it's sort of, you know, it feels a little bit retro in its colors and in aesthetic. So it also, maybe it's a more complicated term that applies to a project. Maybe it is retro utopian, futuristic, environmental, pseudo digital or something. Like, it doesn't feel like there's one word. It seems like
that's exactly what YGGDRASIL stands for.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just my first. I think I have more to say, but this is the first reaction.
Can you guys put just do me a favor and please put page at least you know load the dice here. Put page 31 on, or your animation 31 if you don't mind.
Could you tell me what's written on the left, so I know where to?
A lot of text. Anyone, that's fine. Any one of these is fine. Just something on the screen, so
okay.
Your splash page. What you think you should show us. Again, it's the same as the last discussion: editing and precision.
Well, one thing that really struck me was the wind study, but I wasn't quite clear in terms of how the wind study translates into the form. I mean, there seems to be a literal explanation in terms of this very, very organic, and it's, yeah, those shapes, right? They seem to kind of illustrate the wind in a literal way, but I'm not quite sure, you know, did you shape this as a sculpture and then run the wind study, or did the wind study actually shape the geometry, or which way around? What was the?
So there are two wind simulation strategies that we approached. First of all was the aggregation strategy. So basically how the towers are placed in relationship to each other, because we try to achieve this wind shadow zones for the planes. And that didn't have to do so much with the shape or the aesthetic or the geometric language of the tower itself. But then we went ahead with inner flow simulations. And in this case, of course, the geometry was in, so the geometry did come first. and it is informed by wind aesthetics and flow aesthetics quite obviously, but then it was optimized based upon this inner flow simulations, because in order for the air to actually flow through this spaces, there needs to be like a density difference, and then this is what this is the parameter that informed the inner organization of the geometry, this achieving this kind of wind density difference, so that the wind keeps flowing within the building.
I mean, that's interesting. Again, it's sort of like a sort of answer, right? It's not fully that, it's that, but then informed by that. It's a very, very layered project and thinking that you have. And even with, I think it's something I think every architect kind of has to reckon with right now. It's the big question, the big elephant in the room that you're talking about is the environment and carbon footprint and so on. And I mean, that in itself, right, flying in itself is a big culprit of that. So in a way, as designers, we always have some level of responsibility for things, but then we're also part of bigger society, right? And with your project here, just looking at it formally in terms of the incredible effort of creating that structure, it's actually funny. I read this review recently of the Serpentine Pavilion in London, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a very beautiful pavilion. It's very complex geometrically, and they called it carbon negative. I was like, that's interesting. How did they do this? And there was this really long text, and they say carbon negative in the Zine article at least 5 times. And then the only explanation that is given for why that pavilion is carbon negative is because the steel has been recycled multiple times. And so, so even on that level of like a build project that's out there, the way that the media publishes it, the moment you dig a tiny bit deeper or even think about what is written on that pretty short article, it doesn't hold up. And so I'm not trying to hold you to any standard here in terms of, saying, oh, it has to be completely coherent. But I'm just curious about your position here, or how serious, or how is that, do you feel, and obviously this is a group effort, but like, since you brought it up, I mean, I know it's been part of the general sort of topics of the studio, but you focus on it more than the other project. Is that something that you are really interested in pursuing further? Is it more of an aesthetic question? You're like, where do you want to go with that?
So, I mean, from the beginning of the semester, we had this very clear stance that we don't want to get into this greenwashing sort of world where we say, for sure, we can achieve a world where there's no carbon emission at all, ever, nowhere. And also, like the project that we looked into from François Roche and this kind of stuff, we are more interested in living with the toxicity of it and processing it and putting it out there in the form of products that can then be reinscribed in the cycle. So we wouldn't put a label on it that it's carbon neutral or carbon negative. For us, the biggest, like the direction in which we try to gear our efforts was the processing of carbon into elements that can be then reused within the building cycle, because there's also a question of, okay, you have all these byproducts, and then if you need to move them around, and this kind of approach, this is also something that doesn't really work. That's why carbon sequestration is not so great right now, because you put it out, but then you need to move it around, and then it's not cost efficient. It's not efficient in terms of anything. So that's our stance, so to say. We're not, I guess we're not saying that we are saving the world with it or anything, but we're just trying to process it and feed it back into the system, to create a system that we're basically creating a problem that we're then solving, which is what we're doing a bit with the project, but it's not maybe the worst approach towards mediating this.
You know what I like about the project is that the airplane, basically nobody really understands how it flies. It actually operates, or even the propeller blade operates by the issue of a vacuum, which is kind of very basic scientific idea, that the vacuum produces a kind of movement to close the vacuum. And the best part of this project, I think, are the sort of anatomical moments where airflow and laminar and all these rules of particle movement find a kind of architecture. I think that's the really strong part. There's a lot of dexterity in the presenting of the idea. But the fact of the matter is that it's something that's not really seen or understood that propels flight. And then you move away to all the associated issues involved in that operation. And flight itself is a kind of mystery. If you think about Pegasus and all, you think about Icarus. But this project is an unbelievable venture into thinking about unknown territories and giving them a representation. I'm completely blown away by the project, especially the fact that the what's it called, the wind, you know, all across the planet, the wind locations are at the airports. If we need to know about the weather in a particular place, the airport is the lighthouse for wind direction. We did that on our border stations. We needed to know where the wind was coming from so that we wouldn't put carbon monoxide inside the inspection garages. So you've touched on something that's really phenomenal. The other idea is that those devices, those chambers are so large in the project. In fact, from a scalar point of view, they are much larger as a kind of infrastructural element. They are an organ, which is more akin in its scale to the overall aggregation, a much larger kind of organ than the tower that's a residential piece or some other component. So there's a scalability in your choice of representation, which kind of, in a diagram, imparts a certain kind of importance to that component of the project. I think this is a great venture into really thinking about the future and how we could conjure up a form that runs from a very simple idea, which is, for me, is the essence of flight, which in itself is magical. It's moving around into another kind of domain, and that's the visceral and organic kind of form that actually the airplane wing is a great example of it, right? It's a contoured surface, two surfaces that are not parallel. And with a little bit of movement, a little bit of air, a several 100-ton airplane can lift up off the ground, or a propeller. So this is, I'm wondering a little bit more about the objects themselves. They're stationary, right? And the population and the vehicles and everything else are all moving. There are a couple of examples in architectural history where the buildings actually managed to move as well. There was in Italy, there was actually a building that rotated around to always have a similar relationship to the sun. But as a curious fission between the mechanical and the organic, this is an amazing presentation and encouraging to see, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think we probably have to accelerate the reviews a little bit. We still have one more to go. But I mean, your exuberance is just incredible. I mean, you guys are just, you know, delving into this thing. Like, I can't believe how many ways you slice and dice it. The only reticence I have, maybe Beek was getting at this a little bit, but it doesn't seem like the original kind of formal studies that, you know, you started with, or that you know, overlaid some flow studies onto, really kind of is impacted by your overlays of people flows, not air flows, or, you know, the notion of the I don't know what the word is, the kind of, you know, like air travel happens on a kind of cycle. Like you have, for instance, you have an arrival tower and a departure tower. Like that doesn't make any sense. It's not like a plane arrives, everybody gets off and it hops over, and now people get on and it goes away. So I think that you have a kind of exuberance that is so overwhelming that maybe it's hard to kind of get in there and gnaw away at it. But I you know, there's so much going on here that's exciting, and I can sort of, you know, buy into this whole vertical tower thing. I think your sighting of it on this bridge is fantastic, and there's water next to it. I mean, by the way, nobody's talked about seaplanes, but that's another, it's also a past. I mean, there's this huge, you know, there were these huge planes called flying boats before World War II. Pan Am used to fly them, they're huge. So the whole idea of using water for takeoff and platforms, so there might be a way to think a little bit more amphibious. But I'm just looking at the kind of, you know, I find it a little funny when you have a very kind of complex form that's hard to decipher, and then, you know, you say do geometry studies, it's just sort of like color coding what you have. Like it doesn't reveal anything. But then, and then when you go to show us transportation, it's all like straight lines. Here's the building, and then here's how you move up and over. It's straight lines. So I think that you have a lot of fascinating spaces in there, but that somehow I'm not convinced you're yet in control, or at least it would have been nice to kind of see you, you know, really look into one space and give us a little bit more idea of some of these resulting spatial experiences that you really, I think quite sincerely, want the traveler to feel. And I, you know, I would love to kind of see that. But, you know, the analysis is, I don't think it's doing you a service. Like, I don't know, when you say visualization, you put that, what's the previous page to this? The one you have right now? Go back one. It says what? Oh, wait, don't go, no, go back down. It says geometry study, and then it highlights these things in pink, purple, and green. What does that mean?
Yeah, that was mainly because when we started developing these spaces, we were kind of framing this inner space as dedicated to the human part of the project with these machinistic towers. Okay. And that should have been what's highlighted on the diagram on the right.
So like maybe the title is wrong. Maybe that's, yeah. Okay. Because I think your idea then in this is quite interesting, that you have this idea of intertwining of mechanism, you know, you talked about baggage and so on, and then also people processing and aircraft processing, and how those three begin to shape this building, not to mention the capturing of air and the capturing of carbon. I think it would be nice to illustrate those interactions, as opposed to what I think you've done more is kind of isolated them. You know, and this is the first drawing, now that I understand what it really is pretty interesting.
Okay, so thank you. I just want to point out a couple of things. Do you mind if I share my screen?
No, please go ahead.
I want to present your project for you for a second. I want to talk about something that we never talk about in this discipline enough, I think, and it has to do with Vika's statement and correct statement that these days there is of course an incredible preoccupation with environmental sustainability and issues as it pertains to architecture. However, what's happened is that it's become a kind of a weird, there's a kind of split screen, three modes in which architects are thinking. Either it's environmental, and therefore, to some extent, some pretty boring work is showing up, which is engineering driven, or it's cinematic, and you get this kind of Hollywood fantasy work that's kind of moving images and a lot of effects and a lot of what is not really necessarily rooted in reality, but is a kind of a effect. Or the third, which is kind of, I would say a kind of, what would you say, is a kind of graphic narrative, which is tied to the second and the first, I guess. But the really interesting thing in this project for me, this is just personal maybe, is that you guys have somehow brought together the realities of a kind of notion of an airport of the future, how it could work with vertical transport and other systems, and to Lisanne's point, perhaps even using the sea and other kinds of modes. And then you've sort of feathered in a very powerful way these environmental studies, wind studies, and so on, to produce this kind of strange tectonic extravaganza. And then the narrative, let's say, is kind of rooted in history. I guess that's the third one. Which, I look at this image and I can't help but see Boulay in this image. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I see an incredible legacy of visionary architecture that's in you. Now, how you guys manage that, I'm not quite sure. I love the fact that all four of you have same screen behind you. And it shows that you have this kind of, you guys have developed a kind of symbiosis and a way of working together that is really difficult to achieve, but somehow you've done it and you've produced this kind of work. And so if I just look at these images, this one, and then if I skip forward to, this incredibly beautiful drawing, this is, okay, that's got a lot of effect in it. And then this drawing, which I think is unbelievably facile and beautiful as an architectural drawing goes. And we don't critique drawing enough anymore, really. And I'm sounding very old school here. I'm just thinking back to, crits where we would spend, at least when I was at Cranbrook, we would spend a day reviewing a drawing like this, like a whole critique would be just on the qualities and the intentionality and the beauty and the poetry behind this drawing. And then, these kind of crazy, beautiful, those I could do without. This is incredible. I mean, I don't know, this drawing is just this kind of unbelievably beautiful mechanized world of these transport systems kind of converging on this remarkably beautiful object. And the implicit thing here that ties those three aspects together is engineering. There's a kind of a logic of engineering in your work, which I talked about earlier with Cave, and you see it and it's kind of hit and miss, but there's a seriousness here, and that's what gives this thing plausibility. That's also why it's not just a science fiction, let's say, rendition. And then this image just blows me away because, okay, this could easily be a set for a new film by, Blade Runner 3, let's say, or this could be a kind of fictive cartoon in a book, an illustration of a kind of weird dystopian future. But given how you got this and given what it's saying, and then looking at the architecture here, the beautiful, strange melted forms that are kind of at the bottom of the results of these wind studies and this kind of cavernous space. And then you add, of course, this kind of effects, this kind of surrealist filmic effects of these ships, which brings it into that second narrative. So the fact that it has history, has fantasy, and has reality, which are really the three kind of station points that we are thinking these days as artists, but not enough is discussed. The synergy of those three coming together to produce a bit, because, I mean, how often do you look in an architectural publication or online for that matter and see truly visionary works that are kind of completely off the grid, but are somehow plausible? And I would say, going back through the history of visionary works from again, Super Studio, Archigram, UFO, Teen 10, I mean, I can go through a whole history here of amazing things that we've done. Cedric Price, Yona Friedman, I mean, you just keep on going. That's what pulls all that work together, is this kind of weird, uncanny plausibility. And I would say that's what this project has, which really, I think, is extraordinary. So however you did, it needs some editing, as usual. But however you got, whatever you managed to do, however you managed to talk to each other, and however this was handled, don't lose that. Maybe you guys should form an office tomorrow morning and just become, Team 11 minus. Okay, that's it from me. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you.
All right.
Very
Thank
much.
you very much. That is a very inspired project, and you've raised the bar yet again. So I said that would happen earlier, but I'm really shocked. All right.
What a luxury for you to present their project. Wow.
What's that?
I'm just saying, what a luxury for you to present their project. Can you do that for me sometimes? It's really, really nice.
Well, you know, sometimes I just think that we tend to, as critics, and we all do it, and we all fall into this. You know, it's of course, it's sometimes easy to overlook raw passion and sort of talent that's kind of appearing on the page. And we forget because we don't see real drawings anymore in front of us on walls. We don't see the kind of craft. And to me, I look at this, I'm going, there's an amazing amount of craft in here. And that kind of shocks me. And I'm happy to see it. I'm sure, Bika, I know your work. Look, Bika, I remember the day I came to, I'm gonna present your work now. I remember walking into the Angewante, watching your final review, seeing your beautiful project you did as a thesis project, which blew me away, made me want to teach at the Angewante. I have to tell you that your project alone was extraordinary. And it's that, you know, it had a similar kind of effect on me that this project is having of you know, research by students who are untethered to the realities that we face every day as practicing architects, who are then just kind of have this ability to, as you did and as these guys have, to be self-critical, to be precise, to try and fill out the whole story, but not camouflage the story in complexity, to get to a very essence, something really remarkable. And I remember your model. Do you still have that model?
It does live somewhere in some storage facilities.
You never lose that model. That model, no, really, it was remarkable. And I think it's you know, and you guys, this new generation, you need to build a model. I mean, you know, this is the kind of project that if you were 3D print this thing and craft it and put the same level of meticulousness into the making of this as a physical piece, it would be unbelievable. Okay, I've got to move. Sorry, I'm the one stalling us here. Thank you so much. You four of you did an absolutely